Vigant was a quiet and calm child, and when he grew up, he never enjoyed popularity in companies, as he did not want it all. His friends have long dated girls, and he was still alone. Even Marie, with whom he was secretly in love, gave preference to another. Vigant felt superfluous in this company. He walked through the park and did not understand why he was so unlucky. He was ready to do anything to get rid of this virgin complex. A young man he met in a deserted alley looked strange and unusual. The stranger talked to Vigano about some secret knowledge, with the help of which he can get everything he wants, said he knew about his problems and will help him. And he gave him a book about the occult and magic, promising that the knowledge he had got from it would change his life. And after a few days, he was a participant in a terrible magic ritual, calling of the devil. These people frightened Wiegand by their appearance and behavior. But the young man decided to go to the end because he was promised power over women, pleasure and enjoyment, and he believed them. He was under hypnosis, like he was in a dream. He tried not to think about his actions and simply did what he was told. Vigant acted as if he were a weak-willed puppet. He uncomplainingly did as he was commanded. Soon he felt a floor running down his spine. Then he saw an amulet in front of him and heard the terms of a contract. From that day, he was empowered to seduce women, and Vigant was promised that none of them would resist his charms. But in return, he had to bring his girls to the sacrificial place every month to become slaves of the demon. It had been 10 years, and it was a regular Playboy morning. Wiegand couldn't remember when he woke up alone in bed. Life was like a fairy tale, and he was fine with it. He got used to the monthly donations and tried not to think about whether it was good or bad. He liked to watch how girls under hypnosis of these shamans, or under some other influence, turned from joyful fools into obedient victims, sexual rituals. It was his tribute to the demons of love, and he paid it faithfully. That night was similar to thousands of other nights. Vigano came to a nightclub in search of new girlfriends for the night. He was self-confident and particularly did not choose. Sat down practical first encountered girls because so far he had not been denied anything. Frankly speaking, Vigano was bored with such acquaintances. He was confident in their charms, and it killed the hunter instinct in the guy. These girlfriends were sweet, they wanted to have fun, and Wiegand did not need to look for others. A girl who passed by without even looking at Wiegand immediately attracted his attention. His heart was born a strange, unknown feeling. He did not know what it was, but decided to get to know the girl. He looked closely and recognized her as his first love. It was Mary, because of whom he left the company for so long to suffer. The girl did not recognize him immediately, but was pleased to meet him. He sent her a lot of compliments, but all the words seemed to be inanimate, superfluous. Wiegand feels the old youthful love blooming in his heart. Mary this time did not refuse him, did not push away. It was the happiest month of his life. Mary had awakened feelings in his heart that he had long buried under a layer of cynicism and filth. It was a pure, deep, real relationship, like no other he had ever had in his life. And Vigant, he loved her with all his soul. It was a woman with whom he wanted to be near forever, and most importantly, she reciprocated. But the serene happiness of Vigant was short-lived. Came the fateful day when he had to bring his mistress to the altar. For the past month, Wiegand was afraid to even think about it. Know how he could have given Mary to those witch doctors? Wiegand thought for the first time about what happened to those girls after the orgy. He did not know. But Wiegand knew one thing for sure: he would not give them Mary. He knew that when he took off the amulet, he broke the contract and lost his power. But the happiness of being near his sweetheart was much stronger than all the devilish charms. He went to the bridge, took off his amulet, and threw it into the river. On his way home to Mary, he bought a huge bunch of roses and put it on the pillow of Mary, who was asleep. Mary woke up, smiled, and a chill of horror ran down Igor's back when she handed him his amulet, which he had just thrown into the river. Where did she get it? Although he had assumed this development, he knew that so easily get rid of the devil's mark he could not get rid of. To avoid upsetting his beloved, Wiegand did not even show that something scared him. He had already made up his mind to break the contract. No matter what it cost him, Mary was preparing breakfast and suddenly accidentally cut her hand. But the blood on Mary's hand caused Huygens memories of his youth. He had drunk blood to become what he was now, an independent, confident beauty. But now he was willing to do anything to get rid of this gift. And by the minute, Huygens was more and more convinced that the demonic forces would not leave him easily. He even smelled blood in his mouth when he bandaged Mary's wound. He realized that it was a warning or a reminder. Huygens decided to seek salvation in the temple, because if there are demons, then there are holy forces Guy was convinced only they can help him. The angels must be stronger than the darkness. We must act as quickly as possible, because approaching the same night and anything can happen. The priest listened attentively to the guy and said that he could not help him unless he confessed, because without confession and repentance cannot be salvation. After the confession, the priest promised to perform the ritual of purification. Huygens was ready for anything, only to save his beloved. But he could not confess. Before his eyes all the time there was an image of the theme, calling him, beckoning him to himself, threatening him, and Huygens held on till he saw what he dreaded most of all. Mary was in the hands of that monster. According to the contract, she was his bride. Huygens understood that whatever he did, the evil one will hunt for this girl anyway. Huygens realized that he had to save his beloved. He ran out of the church once again, tore the amulet from his chest, and dialed Mary's number. Seconds have never dragged so slowly on hearing Mary's voice. Huygens asked her to come as soon as possible to the place of their meeting, a cafe in the center. He promised that there would tell everything, if only she would come as soon as possible. But the road was so long that Huygens could not stand the nerves. If only nothing had happened to her, if only he had time to see her. He didn't realize it as soon as he saw the ambulance on the road. Mary was hit by a car. She died in his arms. Huygens knew he was responsible for her death. Huygens hated himself. How could he be dominated by a demand? Now it would be over. He went to the altar, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. When the flame burned, he threw the amulet into it, and he also understood that the contract is not terminated like that. The contract is terminated by other contracts or by some other sacrifice, and the easiest one is a pledge of his soul. The next day, a couple in love stumbled upon a drowned man in a lake, and the investigation determined that it was suicide. Our hero committed suicide. Sometimes, in order not to go crazy from the meanness of their actions, man closes his eyes to everything and removes himself. But sooner or later there will come the moment when life will make him stop and answer for everything. For better or for worse, until death do us part. These are the words from the vows of the newlyweds. If only they knew how true these words are, and sometimes even death cannot separate those who were on earth as one whole. Mark was living and working in the city, and the letter from his grandfather came as a great surprise to Mark. His grandfather asked his grandson to come to live with him to take care of him, and then to inherit his house and land. It was a strange offer. Mark's life in the city was not going well. His creditors were asking for loans, and there was no money for it. So the boy decided to run away to the country, and it was okay that he had last seen his grandfather. In the main thing is that no one would even think to look for him in the countryside. His former friends had no idea that their debtor had a relative in the village. He found the village easily enough, but finding the street and the house was not an easy task. Mark did not remember anything and did not recognize anything, but that did not bother him. The villagers were friendly enough to help him find his way to grandfather's house. Mark was happy with no creditors, no problems, only sun, nature, and freedom. He did not recognize grandfather at once, and grandfather was not rushing to his grandson with embraces, but both were pleased to meet him, exchanged a few words, and sat at the table, homemade vodka, their solo, fresh potatoes with cucumbers. Mark did not know what to talk about with grandfather, so more pin, but also grandfather was not behind Mark. The grandfather was amazed how beautiful his grandson had grown, and so he sat up all night long. Grandfather kept pouring vodka for Mark. He did not refuse, and then it was Mark's turn to be amazed in the middle of the night. Drunken grandfather decided to go to bed with his grandson. Mark did not remember how and when he went to bed and why they were here together, but he felt much better than grandfather, so he decided to go to sleep in another room. The second time he woke up to grandfather screaming, he was sitting on the bed shouting at someone invisible and waving the sheet away. Mark quickly realized it was fever and tried to calm grandfather down, but he heard nothing. Mark tried to calm his grandfather down, but he didn't hear anything. He just stretched his arms forward and whispered like a madman. It was her. She came again. She is a witch. At last, Grandpa calmed down and fell asleep again. Mark was sleepless. He didn't expect his peaceful life to end so quickly. He could only hope that Grandpa was not drinking all the time. In the morning, Mark felt broken and sleepless. His mood was bad. He felt uncomfortable asking grandfather about what had happened yesterday. But his being here depended on it, and he put the question straight. Either grandfather told him how often such things happened to him, or Mark was leaving today, and grandfather was waiting for this question. He started to prove that it was not fever but reality. My grandfather told me that his late wife came to him every night. Grandfather and grandmother lived their entire lives as cats and dogs. They had no children, so grandmother devoted herself to her favorite work. She was a teacher in a rural school. She worked her entire life in the school, and grandfather, meanwhile, loved to drink and have fun with women. And grandmother forgave him everything because she loved him madly, and all his life he suffered. Grandfather decided to leave his wife for another one at his old age. Grandmother grieved and refused to eat. She could not forgive her beloved husband's betrayal and adultery, and just before she died, she asked her neighbor to call her grandfather and told her she was going to die soon. She wanted to tell her husband where she hid mother's jewels, which were lost in '80. Grandfather did not want to go to talk to his wife, but the thought of the jewelry made him change his mind. He came anyway. Seeing grandfather, grandmother said only one thing: "As you did not let me live, so now I will not let you live," and died as if he was only waiting for grandfather to die. Mark listened to his grandfather and did not believe a word he said. The story was too strange, but his grandfather continued. He did not grieve very long. He quickly buried his wife and did not think long to return to the old way of life. But since then, he and his mistress all went wrong, as if some invisible force arranged all sorts of nastiness, and they burned with boiling water or the iron turned on by itself. And it did not do without a fire. Once the mistress almost burned herself, locking herself in the toilet. How and why the fire happened, nobody knows, and it is good that the grandfather was there. After that, the woman could not stand it and invited the healer to the house. It was obvious that all these accidents had happened for a reason. The wise woman immediately said that she felt someone's presence in the house, and then she completely lost her feelings when she came to her senses and said that it was his old wife. She would not calm down until she killed grandfather's mistress. On arriving from work, grandfather saw his things in the yard, and he had no choice but to return back to his house, and grandma had never left him in peace there. She was doing something horrible even to tell. Having listened to this story, Mark did not know whether to believe his grandfather or not. It sounded too improbable. Mark decided not to think about it and tried to sleep, but he had hardly drifted off when he heard his grandfather screaming and the sound of broken dishes. Mark jumped out of bed and ran into the next room and saw his grandfather with an axe. Mark froze with fright. Fortunately, his self-preservation instinct worked quickly, and in a minute, grandfather was sitting on the floor bound hand and foot. The grandfather asked his grandson to believe him. He was not sick. It was his late wife who was driving him crazy with her tricks. Suddenly, the grandfather grabbed Mark firmly by the neck. He looked into his eyes and whispered. Mark was sure that poltergeist reigns in his grandfather's house. He constantly heard sounds, saw dishes in the kitchen moving on their own, and